Spoiler alert for Marie Antoinette. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stepping into Frame, our podcast all about women in screenwriting. Today, we are talking about Sofia Coppola's 2006 film, Marie Antoinette, and I have got Eva here to chat with me. Hi, Eva. How are you going?
Hiya, I'm going good, thanks.
Good. So we're going to talk about Marie Antoinette. Maybe let's start by, if you can tell us, when did you first see it, and when you saw it, what did you think of it as a film?
Well, my first impression was quite good, actually. I think it was a very good excuse to do lots of fabulous outfits and costumes and mise en scene, and the art department must have had an absolute field day. I thought that they were fantastic. I thought that having Kirsten Dunst as Marie Antoinette was an interesting choice because, and I think especially around that time, she was fresh out of kind of Bring It On era and being very kind of cute, well loved, and even the setup, the music when it first comes in, it's very chick flick, or it comes across as quite chick flick. And I was almost confused because I was like, but hang on a sec, from what I know about Marie Antoinette.
Yeah. It really brought it into the contemporary, didn't it? Which I guess is exactly what she wanted to do, wasn't it? And it's funny because when I first saw it, I actually, this is exactly my kind of film. Like, I should really love this film to bits. Like, historical woman story, but brought into the contemporary, and it looks amazing and all that great music, and that like a really, really good music. Loved that. But I watched it twice, or tried to watch it twice, and failed for various reasons. And I couldn't kind of work out why I just didn't finish watching it on a couple of occasions that I tried. And then I've just watched it again, obviously prior to this chat, and I think I know why, but we'll talk about it in a little bit, because it's I think I've worked out what didn't work for me, because everything here is set up so perfectly to be my kind of film. So I think I've solved a personal mystery.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I watched it all the way through once in order to have this podcast, but then because it was a couple of days ago, I thought, I'll watch it through again, just to kind of double remind myself. I can watch it all the way through the second time.
Ah, okay. That's really interesting. All right, we'll dig into that, because I've got a theory. So, but anyway, let's maybe start talking about the more positive stuff. So certainly, I think Sofia Coppola, I think I read somewhere that she was really keen to make this Marie Antoinette an accessible character. And I think she really did that successfully for a younger female, or just a general female audience. I think it was fantastic. Did you think, just watching it again recently, did it remind you of Bridgerton?
As someone who hasn't watched Bridgerton, I'm honestly not sure.
Okay, well now, do me a favor and watch an episode of Bridgerton, and let me know what you think, because the thing that's really striking about Bridgerton is that it's this historical story that's got very contemporary music. Well, kinda like contemporary music played by an orchestra sometimes, or and has really tried to pull itself into a very current kind of world. I mean, the same way. So yeah, I'd be fascinated to hear what you think about it. But the aesthetic generally was fantastic, wasn't it? Lots of pink and lots of cakes, and like lots of cakes and lots of girls having a great time. And I felt like that was quite effective. Did you feel that would have worked really well for that audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I felt it had slight inspirations of Baz Luhrmann in places.
Yes.
Yeah, it was definitely, a lot of it was very much about the aesthetic, and having the kind of up-to-date music with the aesthetic, and Kirsten Dunst as the lead character, I think really would have encouraged younger audiences to get involved. And I also felt that Dunst's version of Marie Antoinette was very compassionate. It was like, if I was super rich and 15, I can see how she would feel. I think it made us like the character of Marie Antoinette more.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I definitely felt compassionate towards her and empathetic towards her plight. And actually, I was saying, because I was watching it with my husband, I was saying I really like her as a character, and that I think is also quite deliberate on Coppola's part, because I think that one of the things she wanted to do was try and get away from those tropes of, like she's famous for that "let them eat cake" phrase, and which is, is a terrible thing to say when you've got a society of impoverished people, and that always gets kind of landed against her as a sort of, and I think the fact that she deliberately went away from that and she deliberately created a character that was empathetic and was quite nice, was really good. It was really effective, I think, and certainly from a viewing point of view made me engage more with the character and engage more with the story, which was really good, I think.
I agree. And I also think that it kind of made it more of a tragedy as well.
Mm.
Because, going into it that she dies. But spoilers, but we said that at the beginning.
Yeah.
But you know that she gets beheaded by a guillotine. Like, that is the story of Marie Antoinette.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it wasn't able to ever be anything other than a tragedy, and she wasn't ever able to be anything other than a tragic character. But giving her that compassionateness, it made us care that she was going to die.
But it's interesting, don't you think? Because we didn't there was obviously a deliberate decision not to show that far into the story, like not to show the beheading or anything like that. It actually left it on almost quite, I wouldn't say positive, but it wasn't terrible. It wasn't, we weren't at the guillotine. We didn't see it happen. And I think, again, that was a deliberate decision, but actually left you feeling a little bit, melancholic. But because you're right, we do know, don't we? We know what's going to befall her, but we don't actually have to see it. And I quite liked that as a decision. Did you, or would have you have liked to have seen the story progress into the truth of it, if you like?
I think within the realms of how the story was told, I liked the way that they didn't show it. In the same way that they didn't show a lot of the other elements of that time. I think it would have taken the audience out of this beautiful kind of created world that this character Marie Antoinette lived in and that we felt bad from her in, if we had seen, the peasants revolting, or the peasants starving, or her then being killed by the peasants. I think any of those would have taken us out of this wonderful, beautiful world. And I was surprised watching a film about Marie Antoinette that didn't have any of that stuff. But by the end, I then would have been surprised if we'd seen her die.
Yeah. Interesting, because I think that's one of the criticisms that's placed against the film, is that it doesn't talk about the politics. It doesn't talk about the social very much. I mean, obviously there's those scenes towards the end when the protests happening and the people are at the door and smashing through in the Versailles and all that sort of thing. But it's very lightly touched on. We don't really dip into the politics very much at all. What do you think of that as a mechanic, I guess? Do you think that was the right set of decisions to make from a screenwriting point of view? Or
I think for the film that she wanted to make, it was the right decision. Because you couldn't have had all of the elaborate, beautiful aesthetics and then seen the other side and still felt for the character. So I think within the realms of the film that she wanted to make at Marie Antoinette, it was absolutely the right decision. Whether it was the right decision to make any further films at all about rich aristocracy where we feel bad about their plight is another discussion altogether, probably.
Yeah. And I think that if she had have been not such a nicely drawn character, and because she's connected to the idea of excess, isn't it? That's kind of what we associate. That's the myths that come with her, is this, this thing of excess. And if that had been sort of more strongly played through the film, and if her character had have been a little bit harder or a little bit less nice, then maybe then maybe it wouldn't have worked. Like we wouldn't have felt the empathy if we'd have known what was going on. Maybe we would have noticed it more. Do you think?
So I noticed it because I watch a lot of historical films, or like The Crown or whatever. When I watch it with that kind of thing in the back of my mind of, yes, that, you know, it's kind of washing over a lot of the issues here. So I part of me would have preferred to have seen them attempt to do some of those issues. I kind of would have liked to see Kirsten Dunst attempt to play someone with those jagged edges, with a little bit more kind of nastiness to her. I think it would have elevated her as an actress if they'd attempted to play a more difficult Marie Antoinette.
That's very interesting, because she does come across, and I think, again, some of the criticisms against the film as it being a bit fluffy is because it is all that aesthetic, isn't it? It is pink and cake and girls and, you know, champagne and fun and a lot of the film. And maybe if it wasn't, you know, I guess there's a dual side of that. The good side is that it makes us empathetic with her life and what she has to go through, because we'll come to it in a second, but it wasn't an easy life necessarily into what she was thrown. But the other side of that is it also makes us go, oh, well, you're a bit dislocated from the social issues that are underpinning that community, you know, that society. So I guess it's probably a hard balance to find, maybe, between.
Well, I don't know that they were trying to find the balance at all. And
yeah,
that's
maybe
okay.
they weren't. Yeah.
You know, for what it was, it's okay. You know, I wrote in one of my notes, it says it's quite Disney.
Yeah.
And, you know, it had that kind of, the feeling of, was it Princess Diaries?
Yes.
It felt a bit like Princess Diaries. And it felt like the film they attempted to make is a brilliant version of the film that they were trying to make, if that makes sense. So what they went for, it works for what they went for. But you could equally make another film about Marie Antoinette that would be an entirely different film.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then therefore she was being very deliberate, wasn't she, in making something that wasn't that gritty historical feature film. It was about a woman's life. So that leads us on to the question of, which I'm going to ask in relation to a few of the films we've talked about now, the biopic, right? So this is considered to be a biopic. So we talked a few weeks back about another biopic of Blonde, and I kind of feel like, and I was just also thinking about Elvis. I'm not sure if you've seen the recent Elvis, but it's also, well, it's not a biopic. Baz Luhrmann has very clearly said it's not supposed to be a biopic, but everybody can't help but say, oh, well, that wasn't quite right, or that wasn't, you know, we can't help ourselves but considering it as a biopic. So this biopic sort of genre thing, I think, is really problematic with well-known figures like this, because it's very hard to escape the expectations that all of our baggage and knowledge that we bring to seeing a film where we know something about the character. And that's particularly so when the character is still alive, I think, is even more so. But also people that recently passed away, like things like Princess Diana. If you think about how difficult those actresses is for actresses to play those roles, because everybody knows those characters so well. What are your thoughts about that? Is it because, you know, as the kind of idea of a biopic and how this worked in that sort of space?
So when I started watching it, I thought of Blonde and us talking about it. And I thought, you know, this is a reimagining. It's a reimagining. Anything where you don't know for sure, it's got to be a reimagining. It can't really be anything else. But I do think it's interesting how this film is almost the complete antithesis of Blonde. It's like it's taken a kind of a well-known character from history who actually was seen as being quite a nasty person who trod all over the poor, and making them seem really, really quite lovely and giving you empathy for her. Whereas with Blonde, they took someone who was this amazing, strong person from history and made her rubbish and weak and made you not like her very much. So it was really interesting to see how kind of vastly different the takes on these women were.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think, well, two questions. A, do you think therefore that the biopic um title or tag should be renamed to reimagining? Like, should we just get rid of biopics completely and just say we're just reimagining? They're just reimagining because it just changes your whole perspective of what you expect as a viewer, don't you think?
I agree, although I kind of prefer the term biopic to reimagining, but that might just be because the first time I heard the word of reimagining was in relevance to Blonde. So I hate
You've
them
been
now.
damaged.
But if it had to say something, I don't know, you would hope the audiences are smart enough to know that it's not true to life when it's about someone that lived 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But it might be worth saying biopics, a reimagining of so-and-so's life.
A reimagined biopic or something. I don't know. Yeah.
I think all biopics, unless the person is currently alive, are reimaginings, aren't they?
Well, yeah, or unless you've spent an inordinate amount of time doing historical research and, going really detailed, which is apparently what Lerman did for Elvis. He said he spent a lot of time at Graceland going through everything. So, and that's where it sort of starts to come unstuck a bit for me. Is it's like, well, you either researched and created or you haven't, and it's sort of, I don't know, I'm not sure. And I guess so. The other question related to that is, do writers and filmmakers, but say we're looking at this from a screenwriting point of view, do we have an obligation to be truthful about Marie Antoinette? Should we not? You think of what's happening lately with statues of people that were involved with slave trade and stuff being removed. We're starting to have this type of response. So therefore, is there a responsibility for us as filmmakers and writers to write the truth?
I always think that there's a responsibility to tell the truth and write the truth. It's difficult with people that lived so long ago to ever say what the truth is. Like if I was writing, actually one of the things I'm writing at the moment is set in like 10,000 BC. Now there's pretty much no way that I can know what really happened then. But
hard to make a biopic of that, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, I have done a lot of research for it, to find out kind of what type of wildlife would be around or what berries would be edible. Or where you would find a sedentary basin. But no matter how much research you do, you're never going to be able to be spot on. You're never going to know the whole truth. I think with Marie Antoinette specifically, that because of the way it would have been marketed, I actually haven't seen any marketing for it, but I'm guessing from the aesthetic and from the music, it would have been marketed in a certain way. And I think because of that, it doesn't feel like it's claiming to be anything other than what it is. And therefore, it's more acceptable to me than something like Blonde, which uses such a similar imagery to that we've seen of the actual person and kind of presents itself in a way that it feels more realistic. And uses more of the reality that surrounded it, like using her films as and when they came out in the cinema. So it put us more within her world and then changed who she was, which I found offensive. Whereas with Marie Antoinette, we're put in her world, but we're put in a tiny segment, a tiny little ball of her world. And most of us know that, the Queen or rich politicians or, anyone that kind of lives this life, they are detached from us. They don't really know what's going on in, the real world or what's happening for the peasants. So it worked, I think, in that sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I'm going to dig into that a little bit because it's made me raise a question in my own mind as that I absolutely agree about Marilyn. I think that's a very good point about the fact that it hit all those major life moments for her, who she married, what happened to her, blah, blah, blah. But it did change her as a person. But then couldn't you equally argue that in this film, Marie Antoinette has also been changed in in respect of what we understand of her, or yeah, like I don't know.
I know, I agree. I think she has been changed. I didn't expect her to come across the way she did. What I understood from
Mm,
her about her as a person in history is different from what I got from the character in this film. But
mm,
I'm not sure that it matters as much.
mm.
Um, because
And why is that, do you think?
because I think even though you know that Marie Antoinette may have been, a worse person than she was portrayed, she was there was nothing around her portrayed. There was, yes, you heard yes, you heard the people knocking down the doors near the end, but you never really saw it. You never really saw the pain, the poverty, the outside of it. Um, so I think most people who know anything about Marie Antoinette would watch that film and kind of feel sorry for her during the watching of the film, but you don't come out afterwards and go, "Oh, that's definitely what Marie Antoinette was really like."
Yeah, okay. So is that the difference?
I
So
think
it's
so.
knowing that it is a version, and so it comes back to that biopic slash reimagining, doesn't it? It's knowing what you're getting before you get it,
I,
if you like, in a
I
way.
think a lot of it is the kind of the set design and the aesthetic of it. See, with Marie Antoinette, it's almost cartoonish. Like I said, it was Disney.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
elaborate. It was Disney princesses, and it
Yeah.
was it was fables.
It's not real. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas Blonde, it was gritty, and a lot of it
Mm,
looked. It was made to look like it was kind of taken, like little film bits taken over time, like a time capsule that you're looking into and seeing this person's life.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? That we're quite clear about the world we're going into when we go into it, because it starts out as that kind of fantastical world right from the beginning,
Yes.
rather than Marilyn, where you feel you might be on a different kind of journey. Well, and actually, yeah, it starts with her very troubled childhood, doesn't it? And it doesn't change, does it? It's just, oh, anyway, yeah, grim.
But do
So,
you know what? I
yeah.
actually, in the same way as the Marilyn that was portrayed in Blonde, I actually did think that the Marie Antoinette that was portrayed in Marie Antoinette was quite a dull character. I didn't
Mhm.
feel like her or her husband really had that much kind of dramatic internal arcs.
Mhm. Mhm. I think
Externally,
you're
they
right.
changed throughout.
Mm.
And they told the story of Marie Antoinette kind of from within this little pocket, but
Yeah.
internally, she didn't feel like she learned anything or changed as a person or a character.
No. Yeah, I think you're right, and that comes to the one of my, or what I feel is the big frailty of this movie in a way, which I think is the pacing. When I've looked back and considered about my inability to connect to it those couple of times, and I was watching it through that very specific kind of lens, if you like, this last time, and what I noticed was, so she's a young girl at sort of 14 or whatever, comes into this world, and that was quite well created. And then we get this issue that she has this unconsummated marriage. And then we have about an hour of just her in this unconsummated marriage conundrum, and inability to get through that kind of thing. And I suspect that again is probably a deliberate decision from the director to make us feel that angst, because the angst is all about, I mean, the women of that time, it was all about what you were doing, producing heirs. That was it. That was your role. You couldn't do that. You're not cutting it. So that, I guess. But then it was, and I was looking at it very, very specifically on the timer, is that at like an hour and a half in, then we get, she has the affair with a guy, the king dies, her mother dies, she has another child dies. And there's just like bang, 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 all this stuff that happens. And what that does, leaving it till the last half hour of the film, is it doesn't allow us to interrogate any of that life that she's having. We skim across it. So we spend a lot of time in this idleness, which again is probably very deliberate. But you're right, there's no real character arc in that. It's kind of a flatline arc, right? And then you just get to the end where then there's this sort of mountain. It's kind of like structurally, it's sort of strangely paced and sort of more strangely structured, I think, for me anyway. And that explains, I think, to me at least, why I didn't connect with it earlier, because I think I got bored.
I agree.
You
I
know?
think it shouldn't have
Mm.
had such a kind of a long lull in the middle.
Mm.
It needed, yeah, it needed better pacing. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, just slightly more. I would have liked to see Dunst Marie Antoinette learn something. You know,
Mm.
like because she was such a sweetie at the beginning, and the whole way through, we feel for her, she's a sweet lady. We feel for her, she's a sweet lady. And near the end, she tries to get all her handmaidens out. And I mean, I was kind of rolling my eyes at the time because the actor Marie Antoinette wouldn't have. But
Yeah.
if we'd at any point seen her be a bit more materialistic or a bit more kind of hoity-toity or like a bit more aristocracy, like snobby, then we would have cared about the fact that she learnt through her life lesson and she cared about getting her handmaids out. But we never
Yeah.
saw that she didn't care. Like she always
Yeah.
cared about them. She was always this
Yeah.
lovely, wonderful person, and then the servants revolted. She can't work out why, nor her handmaids. She's still looking after them. It just
Yeah.
there was no learning
That's
curve
interesting.
there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Did you think, how did you find the dynamic between her and Louis the 16th? In terms of what did you think, I guess, of both the characters and the kind of chemistry between them and the arcs and all that sort of stuff?
I thought it was a bit of a shame that they didn't do a bit more with him because
Mm.
near the beginning, when he wasn't wanting to consummate the marriage, my creative brain was thinking up all sorts of reasons why not. And like how she was going to overcome this marriage bit, and was she going to get pregnant from the man that she cheated on rather than actually from her
Mm.
husband,
Mm.
and was her husband going to turn out to be gay, or was her husband
Mm.
going to turn out to be like asexual, or
Mm.
there could have been all sorts of things, or was her husband going to ask the man, like his manservant, to impregnate his wife so they could pretend something? But
Yeah.
in the end, it was just like they tried. Like she tried not much. She tried not much. She tried not much. And then suddenly he decides, oh, actually, do you know what? I quite like her. Let's give this a go. So, oh yeah. Not only is
Yeah,
it
it was
dull, but
funny, wasn't
also
it?
it's not very realistic. Like they're meant to have
Yeah.
been together 2-3 years by the time they actually have sex. And
Definitely. And yeah, go on.
if you were going to, you would have by then. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, we had a very heated discussion at my house about this afterwards, because I was trying to sort of err on the side of, well, what could really have been going on, And I looked it up, and she was 14, I think 14, and he was 16, so he wasn't much older, 17, very young at the beginning. And I was like, well, like he's 16-year-old boy. And then, and in my household, there was not having that as an argument of 16-year-old boy. They were like, no, it's not, there's something else at play. But we didn't get an answer to that, did we? We didn't really understand what was driving it. And that was, I guess, the other weird thing, because you've got this really long period of time in the middle of the movie where we don't know why, and we never find out why. It just suddenly it changes, Yeah,
it's really
it was weird, wasn't
frustrating
it?
not to find out. At one point, I was thinking that maybe like he was on the spectrum so far as that maybe he had sensory issues and didn't like to be touched.
Yeah.
But if they'd gone into that, it would have been fascinating. Or if she'd
Really
helped him
interesting.
overcome that.
Yes, yes. But then she didn't know either, did she? She was only sort of 14 herself, wasn't she? Look, I just wanted to draw a really what I found was to be a fascinating comparison. So last night I went and saw a film called The Third Wife. It was written in 2018 by a writer-director called Ash Mayfair, and it is a story about I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I don't say the wrong thing. So it's set in 19th century Vietnam, and it follows the story of a 14-year-old girl who becomes the third wife to a wealthy landowner owner in Vietnam. So, and again, and this was fascinating because it was sort of like Marie Antoinette in Vietnam in the 19th century, similar kind of setup, right? But what the whole film ended up being about the story of, so she was the third wife because, they polygamous society, well, that was polygamous back then, but then also it was about the ability to have an heir. So the first wife was the best wife because she would manage to have a son. The second wife was unable; she just had girls. But the whole movie was about the life of this 14-year-old girl and her knowing that her primary job is to have a son. That's it. And I thought, how fascinating, because but it was different in that there was no there was no sort of marital issues in terms of an unconsummated marriage or anything like that. And I thought, this is actually the flip of Marie Antoinette. This is what should have happened in Marie Antoinette, where in that whole big section of the middle of the movie, we're just sitting there waiting for something to happen. Actually, if the marriage had been consummated, her whole focus should have been about raising the family. So it was kind of it was quite a fascinating shift, and it'd be worth, if you've got some time, have a look at it. I think you might like it because it's a really, really different take on what is exactly the same sort of situation, and the whole idea of the woman's role in those societies as being just to have an heir. So did you think in that, how did you feel about that as an issue in the film? Do you feel that it was kind of well brought out? Because there was that bit where she crossed the border from Austria to France, wasn't it? And she got like literally like examined within an inch of her life to make sure she was, a virgin and all those sorts of things. How did you feel about how they sort of set up that pretext and her role?
I thought it was probably quite realistic to how it would have been, considering how kind of fantastical the film was set up to be. But it didn't feel odd. Like, it didn't feel at odds with the film. Although at that stage, I was still expecting there to be some amount of kind of showing the peasants and the poverty and all of that. So it was odd that they did that bit realistically, but not some of the other bits.
Not the other bits. Yeah. Did you think it gave enough weighting to that as an issue, or that as a reality? Do you think we got that?
I think they made it sound very important. It felt very much like the active question of the second act was, will she manage to consummate this marriage and start having babies? But I don't like that anyway. I don't like being reminded of the fact that we used to have societies where all that women were good for was having babies. I realised that we can't just kind of wash over it all, and if it was a real thing, then it was part of her character, and I went with it. But I found it frustrating that was the main active question of the entire film.
Well, and that's I guess a product of the times in a way, isn't it? And that's the thing. I found that also interesting with this film last night, because there was nothing else other than what happened to this woman trying to serve her purpose. And there was a moment, and actually I thought it was quite interesting because there were some interesting aesthetic moments, aesthetic similarities, where, you think of Sofia Coppola's aesthetics around these big expansive views, these quiet moments, these really beautiful, poignant nature kind of moments. And there were those in this film as well. And there was one little point at just towards the end where the girl had a new baby, and she actually reached for this poisonous plant that she knows kills you if you eat it. And she kind of toyed with it a minute. And that was the first time in the film that it made me understand her interior mind around, she's questioning her value and the lack of value in that, okay, I've produced the heir, or a child, it wasn't even the heir, it was a girl. Is this all my worth is? And I thought that was beautiful. And I really would have loved to have seen that in Marie Antoinette, to get that internal understanding of, because we kind of saw it on the surface, like she sort of like, it wasn't happening, but it was more about frustration from her than any sort of internal, what happens if I can't do this? What happens to my life? Which I would have loved to have teased out a little bit. But then again, I guess it doesn't go with that whole Princess Diaries.
It doesn't, but it would have given us more of, it would have been more climactic and had more of a sense of kind of urgency about it. So yes, it wouldn't have gone with the Princess Diaries aesthetic, but I think it would have made it a better film.
Yeah, maybe so. Because we didn't really feel too much, did we? Really? I mean, we felt like we were empathetic towards her, but I didn't. It didn't move me massively. I don't think. Did
No,
it you?
I think that they hinted at how difficult life would be made for her if she didn't have children, with like the mum's letters and all of
Mm,
stuff like that. But the prince was always fairly nice to her.
he was nice. Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's because it was made in 2006, and it's kind of post Game of Thrones life now. I expected the whole of that royal family to be way worse to her. Like when they were
Yeah.
getting her ready, and she had to sit there without a top on for ages whilst they all did the
Yeah.
taking it on turns to put her top on.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
quite funny to be fair. But I think in a more modern landscape with that kind of film, I think they may have gone into it a little bit deeper.
Mm.
But it was very gentle.
It was, and I thought, for if you consider it compared to something like Lost in Translation, which is all about the interior world and the interior world of two lost people in a city who find each other to get some sense of solace, it was quite unusual because Marie Antoinette's those moments that you talked about of questioning her role and came from exterior sources, came from a mum, came from a brother, came from the king. Kind of it wasn't it wasn't really particularly articulated from her, I don't think. So yeah, could have added a bit of complexity to it. I think you're probably right.
I would have liked to see her be a slightly more complex character.
Definitely. I think the movie would have been, yeah, I agree, better, a bit richer from that point of view. But then again, as we said, it probably wouldn't have hit the notes around that kind of accessible, fun, biopic-y kind of thing, which I think she was going for too. Talk to me a little bit about the Versailles. I kind of feel like Versailles as a place became a bit of a character in this film. Did you get any of a sense of that?
I saw the big long lake that they sat by a lot. It really reminded me of scenes from other films where it's been like the White House.
Oh yeah.
The lake reminded me. It made me feel like it was more American. It was like an Americanized version of Versailles.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, because it was they used that shot a lot, didn't they? That sort of that lakeside shot, if you like. Yeah, I think apparently they had like unprecedented access to Versailles to make this film or something. And I thought that was one of the similarities I felt from Coppola's film of this film compared to Lost in Translation. I think in both movies, the city, the place, the world becomes as much of a character. And I thought that was really quite successful. You really felt like you were in that world. I thought that was really well achieved. I definitely felt like I was there. Tell me, what do you think? Do you have an opinion on the use of American accents in European placed films?
I mean, just in general, I felt like the entire film was an American point of view on mid-century France or what have you. I thought the art direction was so beautiful that it does transport you to the world that they've created, whether it's a world indicative of actuality or factualness is anyone's question.
Yeah.
But I
thought it was funny. I thought it always makes me laugh when I hear it, when I see that happen, where you get an American actors in pretending to be in France or somewhere else, and you still got this quite sort of striking accent. But I thought it was funny that Rose Byrne, as the Australian, actually adopted an English accent, and I thought, oh well, that's funny because back when that happened, Australia hadn't been discovered by the European world, so that wouldn't have flown. They'd have an Australian accent. Terrible, but yeah.
Also, the oddest part was because they must have hired a French actress to play the daughter.
Yes, they did. Yes, I noticed that.
So everything else is in English, but she's speaking to her daughter, and her daughter speaks back in French.
And with a beautiful French accent.
Because she's clearly French.
Exactly. It was really odd, wasn't it? It's a really funny choice. The other film that I noticed that in is oh, okay, you're gonna have to help me out here. John Malkovich.
Being John
And
Malkovich?
no, and the historical one, the French historical one he does with Michelle Pfeiffer. Okay, I'm gonna have to look it up because it's gonna bug me.
Sorry, I'm
Anyway,
not
it
good enough
does.
for historical
It's all right.
movies.
It's all right. I'll look it up while we're talking. Anyway, I remember watching that and thinking, oh my gosh, like here we are in France, and you've got these two American accents with like really strong American accents. Dangerous Liaisons. There we go. And I remember watching it when it first came out. God, that is really weird. That sounds really odd. And I picked it up again this time, and I just think, I mean, what else do you do? It would probably be terrible to hear Kristen Dunst and to employing a French accent. Maybe. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you would think that they would have trialed it with everyone speaking in a French accent and maybe gone, oh no, we can't really do this.
Mm. It's very odd, isn't it? I still can't quite get my head around it. But yeah, I did think that was particularly strange using the young girl. I mean, she was super cute, but
She was very
yeah,
sweet, but it was quite jarring.
it was jarring. You're absolutely right. What other things were there? Any other things that you particularly liked or particularly did not like in this film?
Um, I I think that I mentioned it a bunch of times, but whoever did the art direction should get an Oscar. It was beautiful.
It was really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, the spectacle. I enjoyed the spectacle. Um, I thought Kirsten Dunst was good. You know,
Mm.
I thought she was a
Yeah,
good
me too.
good at the character that she was asked to be. Um, I would have liked to see it with a bit more grit.
Mm.
Maybe a bit more. Yeah, I would have liked the character to go on more of an internal journey and to have more moments of excitement and urgency and will this go wrong? When we knew that it was going to go wrong. So
Mm.
not playing with that a little bit throughout seems a bit like a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right there. And I kind of felt that Coppola had adopted a lot of her tonal values, or I guess, yeah, from or that she uses in her film. So again, look at Lost in Translation, very slow, very still, um, and that works so beautifully in that film. It's one of the things I love about it because you get that sense of alienation, and it's just very quite, it's quite haunting, that quietness, if you like. And I thought she did that really beautifully. Particularly, some of those scenes where she's walking through the fields with her the women around her, and there's a couple of shots where it's just like her calf put their calves down and all this long wheat and flowers, and it's beautiful, and they sit in the fields and it's lovely. So it has all of that lovely poignancy of Lost in Translation, and that style that she has, but it didn't quite get the emotional hook for me that Lost in Translation manages to do, and I think that's about the characters. And I think that because I felt like the characters, even though the dialogue is still quite light in both films, they're not heavy dialogue films by any means, but the characters that were created in Lost in Translation were so much more compelling and engaging than I think these characters were. I mean, you think of the Louis XVI character; he was quite flat, really, wasn't he? Like
Yeah.
it wasn't flat, but he wasn't dynamic.
Not
That's
very
for
much
sure.
happened to him. I mean,
Yeah.
speaking like of Lost in Translation, there is a complex and beautiful relationship between the two characters.
Mm.
Whereas, like you said earlier, King Louis, his relationship with the Queen. I mean, there are moments of tenderness later on in the film.
Mm.
There are moments that I was like,
Mm.
oh, he's quite sweet, but there was no
Mm.
grit to him either. That there was no yeah, the characters were a bit flat, and their
Mm.
relationships with each other were quite two dimensional.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's where it missed for me in the engagement part. Was like, if I liked it for just being kind of fun and contemporary, like bringing a story into the contemporary and making us understand a character a bit more, like a woman's life, great. But in terms of really feeling for her life and what she went through and understanding the relationship, and yeah, it was a bit of a miss for me. And so I would put it because we are doing a Sofia Coppola retrospective in this conversation, I would put this below Lost in Translation in terms of my ranking of films, I think. Would you?
Yes, but I would put it above Blonde.
Oh, well, yes. We'll definitely put it above Blonde, but that's not a Sofia Coppola film.
But below Moxie.
Oh, yeah, in terms of everything we've done. Yeah. Oh, yeah, in fact, okay, if we look at it that way, that's really below Moxie. Yeah, okay. Oh, that's an interesting one compared to Moxie, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you're probably right. But yeah. Anyway, fascinating stuff. Was there anything else you wanted to cover that we didn't chat through?
I think I've written racism towards Austrians. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, I guess that was the French thing, wasn't it, back then?
Yeah, they were quite mean to the Austrians, and I did like the fact that they touched on like how the different countries were feeling in respect to each other. But actually, almost because they touched on it to the amount that they did, it made me want more. It made me want a little bit more of the outside world. It was like they were giving us little kind of inches and bits and bobs of the outside world, but only ever in relation to how Marie Antoinette was seen.
Well, I guess it's all that time of empire building and stuff, isn't it? And all the changing politics and changing relationships. I thought it was really funny how she couldn't even keep a dog. And they said, well, you can have all the French dogs you want, but they took the Austrian dog off her.
I know.
Quite unkind.
Poor dog.
But poor dog. Anyway, well, that has been a very interesting chat about a movie. Would you watch it again, do you think? Well, you tried and didn't, but would you watch it again, do you think?
I think it'd be a good background film. Like something you can watch for the kind of aesthetic of it. And not really pay that much attention to the story.
Okay, well, that's some kind of endorsement, isn't it? It's a background film. Yeah, I'm a bit the same. I don't think which is really a real shame because, as I said right at the beginning, it's got everything in it that I would ordinarily like in a repeating movie that I would want to watch over and over again, but I just don't really. So yeah. So lots of interesting learnings there around character development or creating characters, around pacing, those sorts of things. I think for me were the takeaways around, from a screenwriting point of view, the kind of things that I'd pay some attention to. Anyway,
yeah, I agree.
Interesting. Great to chat.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. What are we talking about next? You and I think we're talking about the Virgin Suicides, aren't we?
Yes, and also The Holiday.
Oh, and The Holiday. Oh my gosh, of course, The Holiday in a couple of days. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Really great to chat and look forward to talking to you again. And if you are watching and you have not yet subscribed to the Script Department, please do anywhere you get your podcasts. And you can also check out what the global team of screenwriters are up to at scriptdepartment.net. And please like us, share us on social media, and you can even buy us a coffee these days if you like. So thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.